Okay. I now take the date for the Social Work Resources Committee on the 9th of February 2022. In attendance, I can see we have Councillor John Bradley. I can't see Councillor Brogan. Can I check if Councillor Brogan's in the meeting? Councillor Brogan?
Yes, I'm in the meeting.
Thanks, Councillor Brogan. We have Councillor Brown in attendance. We have apologies for Councillor Buchanan and apologies for Councillor Caliques. And we have Councillor Horn in attendance, substituting for Councillor Buchanan. We also have in attendance Councillor Carmichael, Councillor Chalmers, Councillor Cowie, Councillor Devlin. Do we have Councillor Donnelly in the meeting? I don't think so. Councillor Faulkner?
Tracy, Councillor Donnelly was having technical issues.
All right, I'll ask IT to help her then. Councillor Faulkner? I don't see Councillor Faulkner in the meeting. We have Councillor Holford present, Councillor Horsham present, Councillor Lockhart, Councillor Loudon, Councillor Lowe. Is Councillor McClement present?
Tracy, she might be running a wee bit late, but she will be here.
No problem, that's great. I'll look out for her. We also have present Councillor MacDonald, Councillor McGavigan, Councillor McGuigan, Councillor Naylon, Councillor Nelson, Councillor Nugent. Do we have Councillor Ross present? I don't see Councillor Ross. We also have Councillor Walker present. And do we have Councillor Watson? I don't see Councillor Watson either. That's all, Chair. I'll hand back to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy. Moving swiftly on to item 1, any declaration of interest? No. Item 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting on the 10th of November, pages 5 to 14. Can we approve that as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 3, which is the revenue budget monitoring for 2021 to 2022 for the period April the 1st to 31st of December, pages 15 to 24. And Hazel will take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee members. As stated then, the purpose of the report is to provide you information on actual expenditure against the budget for social work resources, the period covered 1st of April 2021 to 31st of December 2021. That's our financial period 10. This is the third report we've brought to committee for this current financial year 21-22. If I could point you to section 5.1 of the report, we've now completed our formal probable outturn exercise. There's quite a bit of detail in there of the results of that. We're actually forecasting an overspend of 3.147 million against the annual budget. Now, 2.542 million of that total relates to additional COVID-related expenditure for children and family services. There's also an expected overspend of 1.009 million on children and family services core budget. We also have a partially offsetting underspend of 0.404 million in our performance and support services lines. We do expect that the children and family services pressures will continue into 22-23. At section 5.2, I'm turning there just to the services delegated to the IGIB. So there we have an overall forecast of break-even against the annual budget. It's made up of a forecast underspend of 0.030 million in the adult and older people services side, and also an offsetting forecast overspend of 0.030, and that's within the substance misuse section, which is detailed in Justice Services Appendix F. Within that overall position, I need to let you know that we've accounted for a proposed transfer of a forecast non-recurring underspend. That's 0.495 million. We're proposing to transfer that into IGIB reserves and earmark it for future care costs. That's actually been pre-approved at the Executive Committee on the 2nd of February, so that was detailed there and has been approved. Section 5.3 notes that we have had additional funding from Scottish Government. This is recurring investment funding. We were told about that in November. And the Council and Social Health and Care Partnership, the value of that for our side is 8.104 million. Now, it's unlikely that we'll manage to spend all that funding by the financial year end. We think the balance is probably going to be around about 4 million, and we'll also treat that in the same way as the 0.495 million, transferring it to IGIB reserve so that we can use it for future care costs. As we get towards the year end, we'll get more clarification on exactly what we've spent and what needs to be carried forward, but it will be reserved there for the future care costs. Appendix B, as normal, includes the detail of the additional COVID costs. So in terms of the full year effect, you'll remember that the delegated services are funded by Scottish Government via the local mobilisation plan. So within that Appendix B, we're showing that as break-even. Costs for children and family services are forecast to be 2.350 million. That will be funded from the Council's central COVID funding. And there's a further 0.192 million that we're forecasting, and that's relating to costs that are there's centrally held funds for financial insecurity, flexible funding and winter fund allocation. So that's just the breakdown of that balance in there. Turning then to the period we're looking at here. So section 5.7 details the position at the 31st of December for all of our lines. So in line with those projections that we've given you for the full year, there is an overspend of 2.219 against the phase budget. 1.923 million of that is COVID related, and there's also the 0.296 million, which is not COVID related. That's on the core budgets. The COVID costs for COVID costs and the lost income for delegated services, that totals 13.505 million as at 31st of December. And at the same time period, the COVID costs for children and family services is 1.923 million. There is an overspend reported at period 10 of 0.690 million in respect to the children and family services, and as noted in the outturn, that's partially offset by an underspend in performance and support services. So I would refer back to section 2 of the report, ask committee to note the overspend of 2.219 million as at period 10, also the forecast overspend at 3.417 million be noted, and also I have got some budget requirements in there if you could approve those, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Hazel. Any questions for Hazel? No questions? Can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Move on to item 4, which is capital budget monitoring for period 1st of April 21 to 31st of December. Pages 25 to 28, and Lorraine will take us through this.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, Committee. So this is the normal capital budget monitoring report for the resource and takes us to the end of December, which is accounting period 11, as Hazel had said. Section 3 of the report provides a background to the programme and advises that the budget we reported to the last meeting of this committee back in November last year was £6.554 million. As of last week, an adjustment was agreed at the Executive Committee to reduce the budget by £1.2 million for this current year, and that's to reflect the timing of the spend on the Blantyre Care Facility project, and that leaves us with the budget that we expect to spend this current financial year. This budget movement is included in Appendix A and takes the budget for the year to £5.354 million. Section 4 of your report then details the capital programme update for the current year, with the breakdown in Appendix A. Section 4.1 notes that the resources total capital programme then is the 5.354. The anticipated spend to the end of December was 3.088 million, and we had actually spent 2.897. So we were a little bit behind, 191,000 at that point. But again, it's just the timing of the payments that we're making on the care facility project. And as I've said, what we've got in the budget is what we expect to spend in the current year. So if I can refer committee back to the recommendation in section 2 of the report and ask that the committee note the social work resources capital budget of 5.354 million and the spend to the 31st of December of 2.897 million. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. Any questions for Lorraine? No questions. Can we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5 is a workforce monitoring for September to November 2021. And pages 29 to 36, and Eileen McPaig will take us through this.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone.
So yes, this is the standard workforce monitoring report for social work resources covering the period September to November 2021. So section 4.1 of the report outlines attendance statistics for committee, and the details are in Appendix 1. So the absence rate for the resource for November 2021 was 7.7% compared to a council-wide figure of 6.9%. So this for the resource has decreased by 0.7% compared to the previous month, and overall compared to last year the figure has increased by 0.3%. Just to give committee a bit of context, the current overall position for council-wide absence is 7.94%, and 2.9% of that related to COVID absence, and that is as at the 26th of January. So taking all this into account, the projected annual average figure for absence for the resource is 7.4% compared to a council-wide figure of 5.2%. So section 4.2 to 4.5, the details are in Appendix 2. So the main points are that during the period there was 396 occupational health referrals, there was 14 disciplinary hearings, 4 grievances and 1 dignity at work issue raised. There was 38 accidents or incidents recorded during the period. And then during the period there was 45 leavers, and 44% of them completed exit interviews. So details of posts that became vacant during the period are provided in Appendix 2, and 95 posts became vacant. And during that period, managers indicated that 92 of those posts would be filled. 1 post came to an end because it was a fixed term contract, and there's 2 posts that had been held pending reviews within the service. So I'm just asking to refer committee back to section 2 and ask that the workforce monitoring information for social work resources covering the period September to November 2021 be noted.
Thanks, Eileen. Any questions for Eileen? Councillor Nealon.
Thank you, Chair. I know that the last couple of years, obviously things have been anything but normal, and that figures are sometimes skewed because of that. But what's kind of jumped out at me is the fact that disciplinary hearings appear to have doubled from 7 to 14. To put it into context, can you tell us what the level of disciplinary hearings were prior to COVID, say 2019, to give us more of an idea as to what's going on? Thank you.
Yeah, I do have that information, Councillor, and what I can do is I can just put it in the chat in terms of what that is so that it can be shared. I don't have it right in front of me, but I do have access to that information. I suppose the one thing that I would say in terms of the number of disciplinary hearings is some of the disciplinaries maybe the investigations have taken just a little longer because there were some delays related to COVID, and that would result in there being more disciplinary hearings just within this particular period, but the comparative information should help provide context around that.
Thank you very much.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. It's actually just on the analysis of the reasons for leaving, Eileen. We've actually done very well in this over this past period. In comparison to what had been happening previously. But the one thing I'd like to focus on is the career advancement. Can that be broken down into just purely financial reasons, or can it be broken down to the fact that they're going to promoted positions or different positions within social work as a whole?
We don't have that level of detail, but we might have some detail. When employees are leaving and they're completing the exit interview questionnaire, they get a checklist, if you like, of reasons for leaving, and it just says career advancement, but they're not asked a follow-up question around that. However, some might provide some detail within their exit interview, so we can certainly have a look at that.
Really what I'm trying to find out, Eileen, is the reason for them leaving out with their control, or is it within our control? Obviously, if it's the latter, then yes, we need to take appropriate action. If it's the former, there's not a lot we can do about it. Thank you.
Okay, Alan?
Thanks, Chair. It's just in regard to, as you know, the mental health and well-being of our employees is very important, especially in the care at home staff. And I was quite surprised to see that we're having consultation with the care at home staff being held in Starbucks Coffee in the Palace grounds, which to my information is one of the busiest Starbucks in Europe. We're having 45-minute consultations in a Starbucks coffee place with staff about their mental health and well-being. Is there any reason for that? I'm talking about the venue.
I'm not aware of the detail of that. I'm not sure if Ian's maybe got more detail around that. It's maybe a local arrangement, or I don't know if it was done through the trade union. Ian?
I'm afraid I don't have any specific details, but it does sound as though it is a local arrangement in terms of trying to engage with the local teams. But I can certainly check in with the team and get some more information on that, if that'd be helpful.
Chair, if I can come back, do you not think that's quite odd that a member of staff's mental health and well-being and we're discussing it in a cafe? I mean, all these empty buildings with staff not been back yet. I mean, and Ian's saying that. I raised something at the IGIB and they weren't aware of this issue either, telling staff they didn't need to isolate 10 days, it's only 7 days. So somebody must be putting out this information and senior staff like Ian aren't aware of it. I find that very odd.
Oh, well. Right.
Oh, well.
Yes, that's what I said.
In respect to what?
Oh, well. I just said, oh, well.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Chair.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? No. Can we agree the recommendations too?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Can we move on to the next item, which is the Social Work Resource Plan Q2 Progress Report for 2021-22, and Liam will take us through that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Good morning, committee. This is a report that you will be familiar with. It's the purpose of the report is to give an update on the Q2 progress for 21-22, and that refers to the period from July 21 to September 2021. There's 3 recommendations in the report we're looking at. One's just to note the progress and to note the achievements at 5.3 and areas for improvement at 5.4 within the report. In terms of background, committee will see that the report was approved at committee in June 2021, and there's an Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 which gives the statistical detail and some more narrative with regards to progress that's been made. At 5.2, you'll see the indicators that we're looking at, and in relation to the red, amber and green, you'll see that 81% of our targets are at green, 7% are amber, and we've got no targets are at red at stage for this period. In relation to 5.3 and 5.3.1, you'll see reference to some of the key achievements to date, and we've highlighted the drug treatment and testing order. There's the waiting times for drug service, and there's criminal justice reports and guardianship orders, for example, that are referenced throughout that section. At 5.4, you'll see we're making reference to the ambers within the report, and the 3 ambers. 2 of them are in relation to the unpaid work service, and throughout this period, we've not managed to meet the target of 75%, which is a national target. The biggest challenge that we've got is due to social distancing and responding to the pandemic and the COVID restrictions at that time. We were unable to bring in the numbers into the unpaid work service basis that we were expected to, or that we could do, and hence we've not been able to meet that target. And in relation to the other amber that we've got within that, it's about delayed discharge. In terms of planned dates for discharge, we only managed to hit 72% of all the planned dates for discharge against a measure of 80%. In relation to the report, you'll see Appendix 1, as I made reference to, is the statutory outcomes or the social work objectives, and Appendix 2 gives the measures in fuller detail within that. And if I can just refer members back to the recommendations at Section 2, and it's to note the report and the progress at 5.3 and the areas for improvement at 5.4. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Liam. Any questions? Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. It's about the unpaid work service. I know this has been flagged up previously. What's happened to all the people that should have done unpaid work through the pandemic whose basically times have not been met. There was talk of prolonging it to get them to do it. What's actually happened? Has this gone before the sheriff and dates been prolonged? Because I understood that there was talk of human rights issues if this was followed. How many people do we know should have done unpaid work that have been let go? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. In relation to the unpaid work, in order to fulfil the orders, it was seen as a challenge if we were having to maintain social distancing as well. And the Scottish Government, they changed the legislation where it was allowed that 35% of the hours that were afforded could be, we could waive 35% of the hours. So for a number of the service users and clients, we waived 35% so that they could be allowed to fulfil the order within a 6-month or 12-month or an 18-month period. If the timescales weren't allowing that, we did have permission from the sheriffs, and we took orders back to the sheriffs on a case-by-case basis, and we asked for 6 months extensions. And everyone that we've asked for an extension on, we've been granted an extension to the order. We've been mindful that there is a human rights issue attached to this, because it would be unrealistic to expect someone to go for 2 years plus to fulfil an unpaid work order, and the sheriffs are aware of that as well. And as long as the reasons for them not fulfilling it are because of the structural and the systems issues, sheriffs are happy to waive some orders if that's acceptable. But if it's someone that's just not complying, then it's a normal process to be breached through the court. So we have managed to waiver 35% of all orders, and that's in line with what the national guidance was.
Thanks, Liam. Alan, I see you've got your hand up. Was that a legacy hand?
Oh, it's no legacy, John. You're not allowed to participate in the meeting.
Of course.
I've got two questions with your permission. Page 56, the middle action, extend the range and choice of day opportunities. So what is the position with the day opportunities, especially for older people? Are they reopening, or what are we doing? Because I know we're partners, we're neighbours. North Lanarkshire have reopened day centres.
Yeah, I can cover that. So we have done the process of standing up the day centres again. Obviously, we're on that kind of programme prior to the Omicron variant, and we're looking at extending the arrangements just when that kind of swept in. So we've obviously taken a couple of steps back, but we have written to service users just to advise them we are reopening certainly some of the day centres, and with a mind to reviewing where we stand in terms of the prevailing guidance, which is still much stronger than the guidance, for example, that leisure colleagues have to follow in terms of opening the centres for leisure activities. So we have got some day centre capacity on the go. We are still sustaining some of the outreach services, and so we're actively reviewing that in terms of trying to maximise the capacity in the buildings. But I've given an example of the challenges at a meeting just a couple of days ago with our council's transport manager, who was confirming to me that we can still only have 3 occupants in the vehicles to bring people to day centres. So there's still a number of challenges to deal with in terms of COVID safety and just capacity in the buildings, but we are actively pursuing that. And obviously the intentions in the resource plan linked to some of the principles we've agreed in terms of the review of day services to be much more focused around self-directed support and maximising people's kind of choice and range of services, and trying to maintain the best of what we have in building-based services, but also to make sure that we've got options for everyone in the community, not just those who want to attend a building-based service.
Chair, can I come back on that point?
Do it, Alan.
It's just the point of transport. As he knows, I raised the issue that we lease the transport and we were still getting charged the full rate for the transport while the day services were shut down. Now that the day services are reopening and we're being told with transport we're getting limited amount of people on the transport, are we getting a discount on that lease? I.e. we're
My understanding is there's not a disconnect. I mean, the buses themselves are used for multiple purposes. So some of the vehicles, for example, are used to take children to school prior to then moving on to support the
Sorry. Sorry about that.
Okay, so some of the vehicles are used by education as well as social work. Obviously, the council's locked into arrangements around lease deals, and clearly part of the current discussion with our transport colleagues is just having a look at the fleet arrangements, because one of the strands of work we still need to kind of take forward in terms of daycare review is a discussion with carers, having a look at are we getting best value out of the money we spend on transport. Can we, spend that money in a better way and maintain the same outcomes for service users? So that's still one of the pieces of work we want to do some consultation on with carers. But I think what I'm supposed flagging is transport in itself is quite a complex topic. There's not any easy fixes there, and it requires a bit of thinking through and working out in terms of the next stages.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Okay, Alan. Moving on to Catherine.
I have another question, Chair.
I'll come back to you. Okay.
No, okay, thanks, Chair.
Catherine.
Thanks, Chair. It was just under the unpaid work. I know from a case that I put forward to social work for unpaid work that there's an issue, or I think during COVID only, hopefully, that they require amenities for toilets now. So I'm just wondering how long that's got to go on for, because that stops them from doing an awful lot of work, especially in the rural area where there's no many toilets available. And for somebody who's wanting to use their services, it's very expensive to arrange for porta cabins. So just wondering if there's an update on that. Thanks.
Yeah, Councillor, can give an update on that. One of the challenges in the Clydesdale area was about getting access to appropriate places for toilets, and it wasn't just the convenience for the toilet, but it had to be appropriate sanitised sanitation in that, but for cleaning arrangements of equipment. So we're looking at opening a base in the Lanark area that will allow us to at least have a base which we can use appropriately within Lanark, and we've got some satellite bases that we're exploring in the wider Clydesdale area. So the issue and the challenges haven't been as extreme as we previously had, because we've had reduced numbers and it's been reduced work that we can do. I wouldn't say it's resolved, but it's a matter that we're currently actively trying to resolve on behalf of the Unpaid Work Service. And I can give probably an update at a future meeting as to where we're at once we start to come out of the pandemic as well, if that's a continued issue.
Thanks, Liam. Lynn?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, earlier on when I was asking questions, I wasn't quick enough to unmute and get my hand back up. Thank you very much for the information that you've given me on waiving paid work hours, etc. But could you actually indicate how many cases were waived fully by the Sheriff?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't, Councillor, but I can get that information to you about how many of those hours that we've waived and how many hours are outstanding. We do keep a running total on that, so I can get that to you and to the committee members as well.
That's actually not what I meant. How many were completely waived? That's the how many people didn't do any community service hours that they were supposed to do? That's the question.
There was no individuals where their complete hours were waived. It was only a percentage of their hours that were waived.
Right, okay.
35% of any individual's hours.
So none of them were dropped completely then?
None at all, no.
All right, thank you. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Lynn, coming back to yourself, Alan.
Thanks, Chair. Bottom of page 57, the last paragraph, the first 8 bungalows on target, and obviously it didn't meet the November date. We know that it's January, March. I attended a visit to the site with Lynn, with the council leader, Councillor Ross, with the 2 local members, Bert Thompson and Maureen Chalmers, on the site. And one of the things, we were in the bungalows, and I don't know whether Sue Gray might be looking, there wasn't much social distance when we visited the bungalows. But the point with the bungalows was, and we've got to bear in mind, I'm against these online meetings, but they're all recorded. And we were told 2 previous meetings ago that the broadband would be paid for. And when I asked Ian that question in the bungalows, I was told, no, most people have broadband, the others will be getting a start-up kit. So we're going against what we said there, that it would be free broadband.
So what we're putting in place is a basic broadband setup. So in terms of the technology-enabled components of the houses, we have capacity to provide the householder with the basic kit to make all of that safe. However, in discussion with a number of the prospective tenants, it's clear that some of them would wish to have some of the more standardised bundled arrangements that many of us have in their own homes, where your television, your broadband, your telephone all kind of come together as part of a package. So we're obviously not going to offer that from free of charge from the council point of view. So for those who wish to take up the offer of the kind of the council broadband, that's in play. Those who don't wish to take up that option and make their own arrangements can do so. So we're just trying to facilitate choice. So I think the point that you made previously, Councillor, was concerns about people not being able to access or afford the broadband connection. So we put in place measures to make sure that that's covered. But for those who want to make other choices, obviously we can respond positively to that as well.
Thanks for that. Chair, can I come back on the first point about the visit to the actual base itself? And as I say, the attendees, Lynn, myself, the council leader and 2 local councillors, and the local press decided not to take that up because yourself and Josh were, but you weren't there at that visit. The local press took that for me, that's fine. But I asked a couple of questions on the base itself. One, we're now getting told that each of the units will have their own catering facilities, right? And if the people are not used to aren't able to do the cooking, we'll be sending home care workers in there. And I'm looking back at the correspondence, in fact, an article in Advertiser with John Ross, where he said that this unit was to promote elderly people staying in the community. I'm now getting told it's 40 upwards. People aged 40 upwards are going to be using this step down. Is that the case? Okay, so
as you're indicating, the whole purpose of the UK Care facility is to provide step down and to degree step up arrangements to facilitate discharge from hospital, allow people to remain independent in the community. There'll be elements of step up on that as well. So if someone's having a crisis, we can offer some bed-based support to see them through that crisis. The predominant target audience is the frail elderly, but we're also, as I think I said all along, aware that we sometimes have younger adults, as it were, with significant health conditions who may also benefit from those arrangements. So we're not excluding them from access to the facility. I think that would be the community's benefit. So each of the apartments in the facility does have basic kind of cooking facilities. The whole point of it being that we want to encourage the service user to be able to prepare at least cups of tea, like snacks, and not a complete meal. So we're trying to replicate in the way the type of support they would have in their own home. So if you're in your own home, you're either managing some of that yourself, or your care at home worker comes in and supports you with some of those arrangements. And the philosophy of the unit is very much a doing with, not a doing for one, just to encourage that relearning, sustaining independent living skills. So that's why we set it up in that way. There's obviously some communal catering within the building, targeted for the entire campus. So if someone has a period where they actually are unable to make their own meals, we can certainly provide them with meal provision as we would in someone's own home. So a version of that. So that's the intentions of the way we've set it up, and the staffing model that we'll be coming to you in a paper in a minute.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. No further questions. Can we agree the recommendations at 2?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, staffing establishment, page 63 to 68, and Ian will take us through this.
Okay, so segueing on from the last question, then, that this report concerns the establishing the staff for the new Blantyre hub. As we've noted in the sort of finance reports, that the hub's progressing. So the first group of tenants have received access to their properties now, so that's now progressing very positively. So we now need to make sure we've got the staffing in place to support it going forward. So in the report, we've kind of described how that's going to play out, and we're seeking permission to establish a range of posts in Section 5. So as it's been agreed previously, the staffing model for this facility comes from the revenue cost from the closed down McWhirters and Kirkton care homes. So in a formal sense, what we're asking in Section 5 is the deletion of the post that previously supported those two care homes. We're recycling the workforce budget into the new care facility to create a team of staff who will support the care facility itself in terms of the care elements of it, which is the main part. There's another section, 5.3, where we set out the staff required to support the more kind of community-facing elements of the service and support the infrastructure of the campus. And in section 5.4, we're given an indication of the number of care at home staff who we think will be deployed to the site to support the 20 houses in the first instance. Now, that's based on assumptions around who's actually moving in, what their level of assessed needs in the care package that follows with them, and the staffing required to cover things like cover for holidays and training and so forth. So that's the way we've set it out. It's obviously financial implications explain the funding arrangements that go behind that. So asking for the committee to approve the establishment and disestablishment of the post set out in Section 5. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Alan?
Thanks, Chair. Two questions again. Page 65, the staffing. 41 and a half staff at a cost of 1.695. 41 staff. Now, let's bear in mind, it's a unit with 20 beds. It's stepped down for people who've been clinically discharged, clinically fit for discharge. We're putting them into that unit, which has already cost us £8.7 million. That'll be another 1.5. It's nearly £10 million for people who are clinically fit for discharge from hospital to get re-ablement to get into the community. And we need 41 staff at cost. I find that quite horrendous. I mean, I've heard the place called a white elephant. It's more like a cash cow by the looks of that. Another issue in that is intermediate support workers, right? I take it they're a bit like home care workers. Yeah, their salary is much in advance of what we're paying home care workers who we can't recruit. Is there a reason for that differential between a home care worker, one's just come in the door, a home care worker and an intermediate support worker? I mean, if you're looking at 41 staff, that's about £80,000 a bed we're paying for staff in a year for people who are clinically fit for discharge from hospital.
Okay, so the key point there is they're clinically fit from a medical point of view. So these will be 20 people with who are predominantly frail, elderly, or with significant health conditions who will require a lot looking after. So typically in the community, they'll have a care package that ranges from something like 15 to 30 hours per week of care. So running a care facility 24/7, with meeting the care inspector's expectations around dependency levels requires a lot of staff. So we've got some extremely experienced managers who have looked at rotas and dependency levels, taking the learning from the intermediate care we're running at Candarhaven to establish this staffing model, and 41.57 staff is the minimum number of staff we're going to require to make that run. So as we said before, residential or quasi-residential care is an expensive business. It requires a lot of staff, and it costs a lot of money, but that's what's required to keep people safe in these environments. In terms of the posts themselves, we've gone through the proper process with our HR colleagues in terms of identifying the tasks, the job role, and going through job evaluation. So these posts are graded in accordance with the tasks we're asking people to undertake. So there will be elements of direct care involved, not dissimilar to the work that care at home staff do. You're quite correct in that assertion. But there's also elements of intermediate care assessment activity that will be going on within the care unit as well. So that's taken into account in terms of the arrangement. So that's why we've got to that model, and that's why we've got that number of staff, just to make sure that people are safe and we meet the registration and regulations around meeting dependency levels with a safe staffing model.
Chair, could I just have a supplementary to that? I mean, it's been often mentioned that our care at home staff are dealing with a lot of complex cases out in the community themselves. And here we got an intermediate support worker where what can we say, in an environment where there's support with them, with home care staff out in the community themselves, by the way, dealing with complex cases, and their salaries are much lower than what an intermediate support worker is. I don't think that's been assessed very well.
If I can add a little bit more context, Councillor, we are in discussions with the trade union about the role of care home workers and the tasks they undertake, and how that sits within the job evaluation programme for the council. So there is a live work stream considering the role of care at home and whether there's a case to be taken that through getting through the job evaluation scheme to consider whether there's been a significant change in the nature of the work that they're doing that would merit a relook at that. So that is a live piece of work which may help answer your question.
Thanks.
That's right.
Thanks, Alan.
On my second question, sorry.
Second, the third. Well, we like to keep people informed, open and transparent. Page 66, care at home staffing, the care home coordinator 1. Home carers 13.6 staff. So is that staff for the 20 cottages, or is it staff that will be working in home care within Blantyre as well as the cottages?
So that's the current workings out for supporting the 20 people we've got earmarked for the 20 properties. So that's based on their current assessed needs and their current level of care. So we see this as very much an alternative to residential care, supporting people with quite kind of complex needs. So, as I say, typically the folks with more complex needs in the community, they've got care packages between about 15 and 30 hours per week. Now, to deliver 1 hour of care, you actually need something like 1.25 hours of care, because the individual member of staff has obviously got their annual leave, their public holidays, and they've got to go in training, and there's elements of downtime for team meetings and so forth. So they're not available the entire 35 hours a week to deliver direct care. So there's a cover element involved in that. So this is based on modelling around a personalised support package for each of those 20 people, and it will fluctuate. At times there'll be more staff, at times there'll be less staff, depending on the needs of the population. And obviously, in terms of sensible scheduling of care at home teams, it may well be if there's someone across the road who also requires care, this team might also provide a bit of support for them, type of thing. But that will obviously vary according to local needs. So just give you assurance, this is based on people's real needs and the real level of care they require.
Chair, just can I add? Right, so what we're saying, that 13.6 staff are dedicated to the 20 cottages.
So there'll be that number of staff will be put in place to support those 20 people. So that will be their run in essence. They'll be working. So got to bear in mind that this is over 7 days a week, from early in the morning through to the evening. So that's the number of staff that are required. So I would argue that if you took any 20 people in a neighbourhood who received the typical care at home staff, you would see a team of this nature providing the care for them.
Thanks. Okay, Lynn.
Thanks, Chair. You refer to the posts of Kirkton and McWhirter being deleted and the budget recycled. In common speak, what's actually happened to those members of staff? Have they all been assimilated into the service elsewhere, or what?
Yes, so we've reported this in previous reports to committee. So as we closed down Kirkton and McWhirters. We had quite extensive consultation with the staff involved. So they've been redeployed to other care homes, care at home, daycare and such like, so other social care posts. So we secured positive outcomes for all of those members of staff. They've now obviously got an opportunity with Blantyre to advertise these posts. So I would imagine that some of the existing workforce will be attracted to the jobs in Blantyre and will move from where they are at the moment into those posts, and that will again allow some further opportunities for people to move around the social care system if they're not entirely satisfied with perhaps the location of where they're working at the moment. There may be other opportunities to consider other options for them, but that's an exercise that we did quite some time ago, and I think it went pretty well in terms of supporting our staff to make sure they sustained employment in an area that they were content with, and taking account of things like location and so forth. So that's the position.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Thanks. Eric?
Hi. If we look on page 65, 5.2.1, we've got some very good detail there of all the people that we're looking to employ here in terms of everything from hourly rate, annual salaries, gross cost and total cost. But so I can see what we're going to be spending, but we're looking to remove from the establishment a number of people shown in 5.1 on page 64, but we get none of that detail there. Now, so I can see the number of full-time equivalent posts that we are removing in order to finance these new posts. What appears to me in looking at it broadly is that there seems to be an inflation in the level of grades that are being employed between 5.1 and 5.2.1. Now, that maybe I'm overreading into that, but if I had the full detail as shown in terms of annual salaries and total costs and so within 5.2.1, I could make a fair comparison. But as it is, I'm being asked to approve a change of deleting one lot and employing another lot without actually the full detail to see how much I'm saving on the one hand before I approve what we're paying out on the other hand. And this is a common theme, I think, in many things through the council. We don't get a like for comparison, and I find that a little bit awkward here because I can't make a like for like comparison, but I'm being asked to approve it.
Okay, so we can certainly fill in the gaps there, but I suppose the point I would make, this is not like for like. We are creating a different service with a different ask of the staff. So we've got posts that were in traditional care homes that were graded at a particular level at that point in time. We've recently subjected many of the sort of residential associate posts to job re-evaluation, and there's been adjustments to the gradings there. This is in fact a new service model. As I said earlier, we've taken quite a lot of care to review the tasks of the staff will be doing based on the learning from the Candiraven units. We've put that through job evaluation process to make sure we've got those kind of gradings correct, and that's what you've got before you. So what we're proposing in 5.2.1 is a safe staffing model that's job evaluated in terms of the tasks that we're asking staff to carry out. So it's a fair rate for the job in the context of the council's paying grading scheme. So I appreciate you might want a little bit more detail, and I'm sure we can bring that forward if it'd be helpful for folks just for further information.
Chair, can I just come back quickly on that?
Certainly, Eric.
I don't doubt you're doing a really good job, but I'm really not having a go. The only thing I'm having a go at is that I would like to see the information presented in the same format on one side of my balance sheet as on the other side of my balance sheet. This may cost more, this may cost less. I don't, in a way, I don't care. What I do care is I want to know which it is and how it's calculated so that I can give it a fair assessment. But thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I got this fair point. We can note that for future reports, just in terms of providing that level of clarity.
Okay, Eric. Right, Joe.
John, it's great how we can capture all these people to work in the Blantyre area. And when I had to get a lady out of the Queen Elizabeth, and I had to go myself and get the staff who works outside the council, and the person I had to get in so that we could get the lady out of the Queen Elizabeth. Unfortunately, she's passed away since then, but it was sad that the family had to go through all the pressure, and yet we can produce 13 like that for Blantyre. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke where we're going. I know what I would do with Hamilton, the way it's running. It's terrible. It's unbelievable. So people should get themselves together and realise just exactly where we're coming from and where we're going.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks. Richard?
Hi, thanks, Chair. I've just got one question which sort of exercises my mind. You've got Kirkton and you've got McWhirters. Now, they're now theoretically, I don't know the locations well enough. I don't know whether they're empty buildings completely or whether they've still got equipment in them or what. But bearing in mind where we were 2 years ago when we were scratching around for any bed we could find because of COVID, there's no reason to suppose we don't dive down that hole again if something happens. I don't understand or don't know what happens with these buildings. I mean, are they just vast echoing empty chambers? Are they kept in a care and maintenance basis? What happens to them? I mean, they are a resource, or maybe they're just going to be pulled down right away. I don't know. I'm just interested to know what happens with these buildings now.
Okay, so the Kirkton building, which is in Blantyre, is we declared that we've no longer got a requirement for social work. So I believe housing colleagues may have expressed an interest in taking on that site and developing it. That the Kirkton building itself was quite outdated in its model, and my first visit to I was greeted by the buckets on the floor dealing with a leak in the roof. So I think it's probably a building that's no longer fit for purpose in its current guise, and hopefully housing colleagues can find a purpose for it. The McWhirters building is in Lark Hall. It's currently not in use, and the services have been cut off and so forth. So it's obviously there's security arrangements and there's basic maintenance in place, just in terms of the grounds and so forth. And again, there's some early discussions on the go with housing about opportunities to consider how we might use that site. So I think there'll be further proposals potentially coming forward in due course around that. So there's currently no active plans for social work to use the McWhirter site, but it is a good location. But again, the building on it isn't really fit for purpose for any current social work service delivery models, and I would doubt there'd be much else other the council could use the actual building for. But it's a good site for further development of some sort of housing model, for example, going forward.
Okay, thank you. I just wondered, sorry, Chair, can I just come back?
Sure.
I just sort of feel, these are resources which are cast high and dry, if you like, for heaven knows how long. I look at Lanark, for instance, the Lockett Hospital, and I keep being told it's not fit for purpose. I've been around that building. It's a perfectly good building. It can house beds. It's got lots of rooms. It can take lots of people, but it's considered not fit for purpose. And I just find that this smacks of a slightly of a wasteful attitude, if you like, to the council resources. That's all. I'm just making a point.
Thanks, Richard. Richard Nelson.
Thanks, Chair. I've just come back to Richard Lockhurst's point there, and thanks, Ian, for speaking about McWhirter. And it's helpful to hear that, because as a local elected member, I've been asking questions for months now and not getting any answers to what that site is going to be used for about McWhirter. So I think the proposal was that a paper would be coming to social work, which has never appeared here as yet. So if I could make a point or Chair, to have some kind of information about McWhirter to the next Social Work Committee. That would be helpful because local elected members are asking questions, but we're not getting any answers. Ian did give us some answers there, but it's not there in paper, and I think we need that to come to the Social Work Committee as a matter of urgency.
Okay, Richard, I don't know, is that within our gift? Yeah.
Well, in terms of bringing back a further report, I think Suman had indicated that we would be looking to bring back a report on where we go next with residential estate and some of the sites in the early summer. So I think that's probably aligned with what Councillor Nelson's asking for, and that would obviously give us a bit of an opportunity to have a bit more discussion with housing about whether there's a proposal that the both resources might be able to take advantage of in terms of developing services for the local community. So hopefully we can bring something forward in that kind of timescale.
Chair, can I just quick supplement just to say that's great and that's wonderful that we can have these discussions. But what I would urge is that these discussions take place with the local elected members, because we don't know anything. We're not getting told anything. That's part of the issue. That's great that you're speaking to housing, but why not include the local elected members, the people who are speaking to the constituents in the front line? Keep us informed, keep us involved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But we'll keep the local members up to date. I mean, the discussion with housing I refer to is very recent, and it's kind of early days in terms of working through an idea. But if we think there's something there, then we will certainly come back with for discussion around that, because obviously we need to get permissions in terms of proceeding with any such plan that emerges.
Okay, all right, Richard. Alan.
Thanks, Chair. It's just 2 points that were raised there regarding fit for purpose in McWhirter. As many social work members will know, McWhirter is the exact same footprint as Muir Park Home and View Park, where our Lanarkshire Health and Social Care Partners, North Lanarkshire, do a step-down facility, which, if we'd have used McWhirter like that, would have saved £8.7 million. My second point is the term fit for purpose. I also mentioned that Uddingston Hospital had 2 20-bed wards before we get the hub in Blantyre, right? And I was told they're only fit for purpose. Lo and behold, at the last IJB meeting, it was brought up by Craig Cunningham that AWIs would be stepping down to get into Uddingston Hospital. AWIs, for information, are adults with incapacity. It's now suddenly come around that Uddingston is fit for purpose for adults with incapacity, yet it wasn't fit for purpose 6 months ago for adults with capacity. I find that very strange. It's a very strange way to treat people with incapacity.
So I think it relates to the care inspector's standardisation for care within a care facility and a hospital facility, which Uddingston was. Ian, do you want to elaborate?
Yes, I think that's essentially it, Chair. So the NHS can obviously use Uddingston Hospital as a hospital setting, and I think we'd probably all agree that that's less than ideal for an adult with incapacity being in a hospital setting for any length of time. And one of our work streams is to try and move people out of those settings as quickly as we can back into a homely setting. But Councillor Brad is correct. Uddingston wouldn't by a mile get anywhere near meeting the registration requirements by the care inspectorate for a social care facility. It needs to be your own room, your own ensuite room, and otherwise it doesn't meet the standards. Uddingston cannot meet those requirements without a massive capital expenditure on it, and so therefore it's better value building a purpose-built building for intermediate care than trying to convert a building that's not fit for purpose. Similarly with the McWhirter's rooms are too small, the bathrooms are too small, they're not suitable for hoisting people with kind of complex needs. They were built a number of years ago, when different standards apply for a different cohort of the population, one of the core premises of us modernising the estate is that buildings such as Kirkton and McWhirter are no longer fit for purpose, and they fall well short of the standards we deliver in places like David Walker Gardens and Meldon and McKillop.
Okay. Mary?
I'm obviously in the same wavelength as Ian, because Ian has just answered what I was going to come up and say, that McWhirter and Kirkton weren't fit for purpose because the doors weren't wide enough, you couldn't hoist, and they weren't the room standards. So that's not set up by us, those standards, but it's coming from the Care Commission, and I think it's only right that people deserve that level of care to that high standard. So, yeah, I totally agree with what Ian had just said.
Thanks, Mary. Catherine?
Thanks, Chair. No, it's just why we're talking about not fit for purpose. Well, we had a discussion a number of years ago about McClimate House not being fit for purpose, and we were going to be getting a new McClimate House in Flush Park. We're still no further forward. I mean, it's just ridiculous the amount of years that's gone by, and at every meeting I'll probably mention it, but I'll mention it again. Are we anywhere with McClimate House and the new building in Flush Park?
I think that's a big consequence of COVID and going forward. I'll let Ian come in, Catherine. I'm sure you've had that answer before. And
Yes, Chair, but that's essentially the issue. So some of those developmental strands of work have had to be set aside while we responded to COVID. So that the staff team who would be working on the residential modelling have had to put a huge amount of effort into keeping our care homes safe over the COVID period, responding all to the guidance and regulations. And I think they've done a fantastic job in doing so. They've also, at the same time, been working on the Blantyre site, giving that priority. So I think the current view from our chief officer is that nothing will be happening in terms of those arrangements around Flush Park, for example, until the summertime, when hopefully we're no longer dealing with COVID in quite such an intensive way, and we've got a little bit of capacity to redivert our staff onto the developmental activities as opposed to the reactive activities around COVID. So that's where we're at.
Alan?
Aye, Chair, just to come back there, Ian's point and Mary's point, if we're saying Uddingston with the Care Commission standard isn't fit for purpose, why are we putting adults with incapacity in it?
Because we're putting adults with incapacity in a hospital, not a social care setting. So it's a completely different set of standards. But I think if you had one of our nursing colleagues on the call, they would probably advise you that this is not an optimised model. It's a hospital ward that's available, meets the NHS standards, but it's not what folks would consider the best form of care. It's what we can offer within the available resource. What we're building in Blantyre is a future-facing, high-quality, purpose-built model that you can never deliver in Uddingston Hospital, and I suggest it might even cost more to have converted Uddingston than the work in the new building.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ian.
Just bring in Craig to clarify.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to clarify that point. It's not that we were proposing building additional beds. There's AWI patients currently in Uddingston and indeed some in Hare Myers, and the proposal was to redesignate some of the beds as AWI specific, such we could try and get a bit of resource around those beds and use that facility so that we could try and get the appropriate support to allow the AWI patients to move through the system quicker than they currently are otherwise able to do. As Ian says, the beds in Uddingston are not what we would want. We've had this discussion before, and COVID, if anything, just absolutely exemplified it. Modern hospitals are built with single bedroom accommodation such that it maximises infection prevention control and doesn't mean you've got to shut down a full hospital or a full ward if you've got one or two patients within it. So single room accommodation is the standard that we now need to provide, and neither Uddingston nor Lockhart nor many of the other areas we've touched on provides that level of accommodation, I'm afraid.
Okay, no further questions quite a comprehensive discussion on that. Can we agree the recommendations at 2?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 8, which is a Home First approach, and Ian will take us through this.
Thanks, Chair. So committee will recall at the start of the meeting, Hazel talked about additional £300 million coming into the social care system. A large chunk of that money is targeted at creating capacity in care at home and the infrastructure that support it, and multidisciplinary team working. So this report concerns how we wish to spend the first chunk of that money, and in fact I've already begun to do so in terms of a kind of emergency response due to the pressures in the system around COVID. So what they're proposing in this paper is that we expand the care at home service predominantly around the front door. So we've talked about this in previous reports about our ambitions to have a much more robust kind of rehabilitation and assessment element of care at home. So when the person comes out of hospital or when they're coming into the service from the community, we'll maximise the opportunities around rehabilitation, OTs looking at how we might use equipment and adaptations to support the person, and that's backed up with a Living Your Life You Choose SDS assessment completed by a social work assistant. So the staffing model that we're proposing here in section 5 does 2 or 3 things. One, it consolidates some posts in the hospital team that are funded from temporary funding streams. So we're using some of this funding to consolidate those arrangements. We're creating some additional care management capacity around social work assistants to make sure that people get their assessment done as they have a right to. And in the previous reports, we've talked about some of the pressures on the assessment care management teams. As the number of people coming through care at home services has grown over recent years, the capacity in the locality teams hasn't grown to match it. So this provides an opportunity to remedy some of those issues, and we're putting in place, as you see, an extra 54 home carers with some senior home carer support behind that to deliver the service. So this will be the sort of first tranche of the spending of the money. There's also new posts being created in the NHS system to support this, so additional nursing posts, additional EHP posts as well. So the service user will benefit from that multidisciplinary intervention and assessment with the care at home team taking forward their goal planning and rehabilitation programme over roughly a 4-week period, and then with a couple of weeks potentially of a handover for folks into a long-term service. We've got this scaled up, very small scale at the moment, around some hospital discharge in East Kilbride, but it's proving to be very successful in terms of getting to people quickly and reducing the level of care they require in the long run. So we're asking for the committee's approval to establish the post set out in section 5.1.
Thanks, Ian. Any questions, Robert?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I wondered if you were finding, Ian, particular problems in actual recruitment, either directly or because of side effects in terms of you're getting from the private sector and that's causing them problems or whatever. It actually is quite a significant issue to get enough staff in place on this sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So workforce is a big issue, and it was one of the reasons we're trying to do this in a stage way, is to try and not disrupt the wider system. So posts that are around this, such as some of the nursing staff, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, are in short supply. So we're trying to be measured in terms of recruiting into this model, so we don't pull staff from the existing kind of core teams and then further create problems there. We have been actively trying to recruit care at home staff over the few months leading up to the end of the year. We had several campaigns and we brought in around about 100 or so care at home staff, but that was essentially keeping up to pace with general turnover and anticipated turnover. We've recently launched a new campaign around this model that just went live last week in anticipation of these posts being approved, and already we've had, I think, 30 or 40 expressions of interest for those job roles. I think, to be fair, because the council offers reasonably decent terms and conditions, we can pull staff into those roles, but I think you're correct to note that one of the challenges is that we potentially pull staff from other providers that we depend on, because our terms are slightly better than the ones that they can offer. There's obviously work on the go at a national level to be looking at rates of pay for social care staff. So part of this funding stream put in place a minimum £10 an hour for social care staff, and I think that's due to go up to about £10.50 after April time. So just to try and make sure that there's a better rate of pay so that people generally are more attracted into the social care professions. But you're quite right to know that whatever post we look at now, there are workforce challenges, whether it's in the social care posts or NHS posts. There's an issue with workforce supply in a competitive market.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Robert. No further questions? Can we agree the recommendations at 2?
Agreed.
Thank you. I propose to
Chair,
take the next...
Sorry, Chair, I think Councillor Fortnum was trying to get in there.
Oh, Alan, sorry, Alan. Did I miss you?
My fault, Chair. My hand wasn't up. If I could. I'll tell you what it is. In bottom of page 69, discharge process limits have been achieved April 20 to December 21. A 50% decrease, approximately 140 delayed discharges down to 70, which is very good. During that period, if you go to page 71, with 3 social work assistants who do the community care assessment, right, we're now going to recruit another 17 on a permanent basis. Yeah, the 3 had got a 50% reduction up to December 21, and we're going to recruit another 17. With 3 had got a 50%, just the maths here.
Okay, so the maths are quite straightforward. We've got now several thousand people in receipt of care at home services between in-house and external services. So we need to make sure that each one of those folks has got a Living Your Life You Choose assessment. And when we look at the SDS report a little bit later on the agenda, you'll see that Andrea has flagged that there are issues in terms of making sure everyone has got a proper SDS assessment, SDS support plan, and care at home is one of the areas where I think we have some weaknesses in the current arrangement. So by bringing in additional social work assistants, it will give us much more capacity to make sure that Living Your Life Issues assessment is done, and then particularly in terms of the external care packages, we've got capacity to do regular reviews of those to make sure that the service isn't either over or under provided, and give that kind of assurance that we're getting best value from the council point of view, because that review activity is going on. So we do need to boost the number of people in assessment and care management. So often we focus on the demographics about increased numbers of frail elderly with increased levels of need, and how we therefore need more kind of care at home type services. But we need to remind ourselves that all of those folk also need to have an assessment, also need to have a review. There's care management activity that needs to take place as well. So you do need to grow your care management workforce in a parallel way to growing the social care delivery element of the workforce. So you've got a balanced system overall, and that's what we're proposing in this report. Is that mix of posts, so we have that balance in the system to make sure the whole system works well.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. If there's no objections, I'd like to take item 9 and item 10 together and come back for individual endorsement. That's okay. They are related and it's the same presenter, if that's okay. Ian.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. The committee will recall that there was delegated authority given to the Chief Officer and Director of Finance about setting rates for social care providers, so setting rates for care homes, external care home providers, based, I suppose, on the advice from COSLA in terms of uplifts, and the intention being to make sure that things like increases in the wage rates I referred to earlier for social care staff are pushed through quickly so people get the benefit of that. So report 10 provides an update on the result of that, and report 9 is proposing an extension of that arrangement, bearing in mind there'll be a wee while before the next social work committee, so we anticipate there'll be uplifts in the rates for care homes and for our external social care staff. So we just want to make sure that Suman and Paul can make those payments at the earliest opportunity, and we'll then come back to next committee with an update on the rates that have been agreed. So just to give assurance that those will be in line with the national recommendations coming out of COSLA. So we're asking for approval for paper 9 in terms of that delegated authority, and to note the rates that were put in place in paper 10.
Okay, any questions? Okay, can we agree the recommendations in paper 9 at 2?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Paper 10 to.
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 11, which is a strategic commissioning plan, and that Craig Cunningham will take us through this presentation.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask for the slides to get shared, and I will talk you through the presentation, folks, and give you an update on the process thus far. Okay, if you go to the next slide, please. So just to give a wee bit of background, this is our third strategic commissioning plan, and it covers the period 2022 through to 25. And we have sought to try and do the engagement this time round differently to the last twice, obviously given the restrictions on public meetings and the likes due to COVID. But in many ways, it's allowed us to reach a number of folk that traditionally we have struggled to reach, or at least haven't participated in the way that they have this time round. So as well as the online survey, we also undertook a process of engagement events. We invited all the locally elected members from each locality to come along to individual sessions within that locality. We've had sessions with a whole range of different stakeholders, all of whom have got an interest in the strategic commissioning plan and the work of the IJB. And beyond that, we also introduced this time round an engagement toolkit, in that some of our partners, so like independent sector, some housing colleagues, some of the folk from the third sector were saying it would be really helpful if they were able to then take the slides that we had shared with them to then go and share with their wider stakeholders, such that they were then able to bring back points and feed that into the discussions that we had. And I've got to say the discussions were very, very rich, and indeed a lot of really good points were contained from them. And what we've done is we have took a thematic analysis of all the different feedback we got, the points that were made, and combined those to create the draft strategy, which is currently being discussed with some of those that were involved. The other thing I would be keen to highlight is that we have been very clear to link in with the council, the health board, and the wider community planning partnership to make sure that there's a consistency across the respective strategic documents, and indeed some of the feedback that we received we've shared with the respective groups, because that in turn will help shape the strategies of those respective organisations. Next slide, please. So whilst far and away the bulk of the priorities were very similar to those from previous years, it was quite interesting that there were some themes that were emerging this time round, some of which I think were as a direct result of COVID and the changes that have had to be made to how we deliver services during that period. I think some of it might well have been related to the consultation process associated with Feely and the National Care Service, and people having been offered, the opportunity to say how do they think they would like things going forward. And some of it, I think, is, in fact, there's no doubt, much of it was lived experience, where particularly community groups had been much more involved with neighbours and neighbourhoods, and were therefore able to feed into the discussion some of the things they were seeing within their own localities and the impact that COVID and other things have had on the wellbeing of the community. So the main three kind of broad themes that were emerging were the bit about core and statutory services. Some of this stuff we've actually touched on quite a wee bit during the course of the meeting this morning. And it is that bit about how do we enable people to stay at home. And so the process that Ian was talking through around how we would help take people who would otherwise not be fit to go back to their own home, provide them with a period of rehabilitation, remobilisation, in a homely type setting such that they were then able to get to their own home, and therefore that in turn would allow us to provide something that was more in keeping with the person's own wishes and their choices. The other thing is that the issue around kind of SDS came up a wee bit, but it was more about how do we give people the right to get a package of care that is linked to their individual need. And some of that covered some of the things we've touched on already, your different approaches to traditional daycare models, to traditional care at home models, and how do we actually work with individuals. And all of that should be supporting a process that helps people avoid admission to hospital where at all possible, but definitely streamlining the discharge process where appropriate. It was actually encouraging to hear the amount of recognition that was given throughout the engagement to mental health. Mental health is traditionally what was being described as something of a kind of Cinderella service, and yet, a significant number of people were saying they could see how people's mental health and well-being had been impacted by COVID, not maybe able to access some of the services they traditionally did. But it wasn't just services, it was about people not being able to do the things that they would normally have done. And there's something in here for us, and again, this is back to some of the wider community planning partnership stuff. Because we've been providing people with their shopping, their prescriptions, folk were shielding, old folk were worried about leaving their own house. They weren't therefore getting the exercise they might normally have got. They weren't getting the discussions with people at the post office or at the chemist, and so a lot of these things had then impacted on people's well-being and indeed some of their mental health issues, and some of that was fed through. But it also impacts on people's physical well-being, and again that then led into the discussion about what are we doing to try and get earlier intervention and prevention. How do we push that whole notion about supporting people to access services and in many ways facilitating the people to access services themselves? So some of the work we've done with South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, some of the green space work, and again, much of that links back to the mental health agenda as well. The other bit that we highlighted, and again, I think this was quite helpful, was the impact in terms of people with substance misuse issues and how there was a perception that was perhaps being hidden somewhat in the current arrangements where people were less likely to be out and about, and therefore, again, we needed to recognise that going forward. Okay, next slide, please. So a number of things folk will recognise here, and it was interesting, Councillor Brown touched on it a wee bit as well. We have got a big impact of COVID in terms of unmet need, and some of that is about people thinking they've not been able to access services and therefore haven't, and therefore there's hidden demand there. But some of it, and in fact much of it, is where GPs in particular have had a really, really hard time, because where they would normally see somebody, refer them on for an x-ray or physio, the people have not been able to access those services because of the impact of COVID and social distancing, and hospitals been full of patients with COVID. And therefore these patients are then coming back to the GP time after time after time because we've not been able to get that flow through the system. So tackling the backlog of unmet need is going to be really, really significant for us. And again, Ian touched on it a wee bit as well. Making sure that we're reviewing people's care packages, making sure that we're still providing services that are fit for purpose is going to be a big ask for us. And the difficulty is that every other council, health board, IJB is in a similar position. So there's a big demand for staff, and it's going to take us time to be able to grow that resource to be able to provide that service to be able to meet the demand. Lots of good things have come out of this as well, though. We're sitting here, doing a meeting with, 30 odd, 40 people on it, We've not all had to jump into a car. We've not all been, doing things that might impact on the environment. We have been able to avoid travel, and for some patients in particular, and other service users, what they're saying is being able to access services from the comfort of their own house or from their workplace without having to take time away from their work is actually something that is very convenient, and they find it helpful. And we therefore need to make sure that we're maximising that use of technology. There's more and more people now that are comfortable with the use of technology, and we need to make sure our services are responsive to that, and indeed we change our service provision so that people are able to maximise how we use those things. There's also potentially savings in here around buildings, and again, we've touched on buildings earlier. If a third of your workforce can be working from home at any one time, then obviously that significantly reduces the amount of office space you require, and in turn then potentially you could use any savings from that to invest in people or other services. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, the priorities are as described there on the screen. I've touched on a number of those as we have gone through the presentation. One of the things that I'll just again comment on, the bit about housing, reducing homelessness, etc. We have got a very, very good relationship with our housing colleagues, and we work very well together. And you'll see through the strategic commissioning plan your reference to the housing strategy and how we are working together to provide that level of support. And again, I think that is something that we're going to rely on much more as we move forward. And it's been touched on about the use of technology in people's houses. Whilst we were talking about the Blantyre scenario in that discussion, I think moving forward, and I know that housing colleagues have got this in mind, we need to make sure that our housing stock and indeed support we provide to people with private ownership supports the use of technology, and how we maximise that to allow people to remain as independent for as long as possible. So I will stop at that and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Craig. Margaret Walker.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. Thanks very much for that, Craig. It's very informative as usual. Just a couple of things, and it goes back to what one of the previous councillors were saying. Obviously, in order to have enhanced levels, of SDS payment is going to cost a significant amount of money. So that's obviously going to come, as you've said yourself, from other services. So it's a bit about having the financial read across in terms of where the money is going to come from, and to clearly outline if we're talking about an estimation of how many sort of SDS enhanced care packages that we would then be providing. And also, I think it's important that we actually do an equalities impact on that particular transference of money and how it's going to impact people in relation to the services that are not going to be there. So it does go back to what previous councillor was saying, that we really need that financial information, and I've yet to see that in any of the versions of the commissioning strategies. And I know that we've been asking for it for some time, because it's really important we have that information to look at the overall impact of this, and if indeed it is going to afford sufficient resources to provide the quality of care through SDS that we would want to. Also, in relation to to mental health services, the CAMHS, that's a major issue. I think it was Councillor McGuigan had put a very impassioned plea to look at that and to have a timescale in terms of how we're going to reduce the waiting times for CAMHS. So it's pretty topical just now, and I think we need some more detailed information on that in relation to timescales and action plans and what we are doing to actually help increase the access, particularly to young people, to mental health services. At the moment, I had asked for information that was kindly provided in relation to the proportion of services that were actually still online in terms of mental health services for young people, and I think it was over 40% the last time I looked. So that's going to be having an impact. And apologies if it's changed since then, but there was a significant proportion of mental health services that are actually still being provided online. And I know there is some evidence to suggest that there are some young people, yes, that are okay with it, but when we get into more complex scenarios, that is not always the case. So the devil is in the detail around some of that stuff, and it would be good to see more of that. And also, a lot of the feedback and the surveys that have been done have actually showed quite clearly that there are significant numbers of people that would prefer to have, more face-to-face services back in place. So yes, while we do reach some people with technology that we didn't previously, I think we've also lost people, particularly in relation to maybe carers. There's quite a lot of carers prefer to have face-to-face services. Which brings me on to really the final point. Carers are going to be crucial in all of this. So more detail in terms of how additional money for carers is going to be used, how we'll be supporting carers, because in terms of the way the services have been developed, and obviously more people being at home, I think we have to acknowledge carers are going to be involved to a significant degree in that, because most of the surveys that have taken place with carers they've universally said that the number of hours that they're providing care has actually increased. So we need to have a significant focus on carers and how we're going to support them within that strategy. So those are the kind of main points that I would make at the moment. And as I said, the key one is, as always, needs more financial detail, and also more detail maybe around the role of the third sector as well, specifically how we're going to commission that, and specifically costings around that as well. So with that, I'll leave it with that. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Margaret. Alan?
Hi, thanks, Craig, for that. And obviously, we're facing very challenging times. We try to get respite or even long-term care because of changing conditions day to day. But there was a thing that I raised at the IGIB, and it's occurred again, and it's in communication. We have discharge coordinators, and for the second time in the last month, a case that I've been on, the person has passed away and the relation has contacted us, and the next day you get the discharge coordinator emailing you to see when they're getting discharged. And you would think within the hospital, if somebody passes away, there should be a system whereby the ward, once the relatives have been informed, are letting the discharge coordinator know right away, and know of the discharge coordinator chasing up for a discharge of somebody who unfortunately has passed away. As I say, you're facing very challenging times. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. Hugh?
Thanks, Chair. Can I just thank the officers for all the detailed responses that I received for the questions that I'd raised prior to the committee today. It's just something that's sort of just come into my head there, and it's around the question of equity. So I was just looking to try and get an understanding really of how this will be taken forward. Will it be taken forward on a locality basis or an authority-wide basis? And how are we going to use, I suppose, the reviewing officers in terms of ensuring that there's equity across the board?
Okay, Craig, there's a few for you to consider.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks everybody for your points and as always very well made points. I'll try and go through them roughly the way they come in, and one or two of my colleagues can jump in if needs be. So in terms of the SDS, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I think in the paper that we'd previously seen about the numbers of folk with SDS, we've still got a bit of a way to go. And my understanding of the experience for the vast bulk of people is that if they have got an individual SDS package that supports their own specific personal needs, then that tends to be fairly flexible, and indeed it supports them to stay in the community fairly well. So I wouldn't expect, because there are more people going on to SDS, that would cost us more money overall in terms of the wider system. But rather, there will be a process of transfer, and we would need to do that in a way that was safe and made sure that everybody was still receiving the respective service. It also picks up the point Ian was making earlier about the need for us to have staff who are reviewing care packages, because we've still got a responsibility to ensure that folk are in receipt of a package that is appropriate to their needs. In terms of Councillor Walker's points around CAMHS and mental health, absolutely. Again, as the case across the CAMHS service is struggling with the increased demand they're now receiving. And they're currently undertaking a process of reviewing all the people on the waiting list to make sure that they've got appropriate prioritisation and that they're meeting those that absolutely need to be seen. And if my colleagues from North Lanarkshire were here who host it, they will tell you that they've got a process of review such that those that are in immediate need are able to be seen. But we're also just in the process of, funnily enough, using one of the vacated wards in Udston to create a CAMHS hub in Hamilton. And that will allow us to get more people seen. We will design that in such a way that it allows a number of supporting functions to be available there too. And it would also then allow us, where possible, and absolutely it wouldn't be possible in all cases, but where possible, to use technology or indeed other support services to be able to provide some of the wraparound that some of the young people and indeed their parents might need in providing an appropriate level of service. But it's something that we've got under constant review. We've been asked to report on it monthly to Scottish Government because it is a very topical issue. And again, the exact same is true for mental health services. It wouldn't be appropriate for all people to do things online, but for those that they can, then that certainly frees up some resource to allow those that need face-to-face to be able to get that. Again, carers come out as one of our priorities, and that will continue to feature as a priority of the Strategic Commissioning Plan going forward. I know that there was a report to the last Social Work Committee, I think, or a recent one, on the work we've been doing around carers, the additional investment that's been made around that, and indeed we are in the process of receiving probably additional funding from Scottish Government for carers. It's about to be announced, and again we will use that to maximise the support we're able to provide. We've been doing some excellent work with Lanarkshire Carers Centre, and one of the things that has emerged is that we have seen a significant increase in the number of registered carers. Now, that might well be linked to the fact that there was funding made available and people had to be registered carers to access it. But again, that's no bad thing, and that allows us to get more visibility of that. So it's certainly something that we've got very much on our radar. Vaslan, the work we're doing with the third sector, again, a significant bit of work we're doing there. We have got a number of schemes that the IJB fund to provide a wider range of services and supports, such that they're helping keep people mobile, they're avoiding isolation, they're supporting people to stay in their own homes where possible, and all of the things that are supported through Vaslan, they've got to be consistent with the priorities that we've just seen before they would be funded from ourselves. And I've got to say that the work we've been doing with Vaslan recently has been very encouraging, and they are very much on side in terms of trying to support the wider work we're doing. In terms of Councillor Faulkner's point about the miscommunication between people that may have passed away and the word not got to the discharge coordinator, there are systems in place to try and make sure it doesn't happen. But one of the vagaries of working in the health service and social work and the council often is that we're dealing with human beings, and quite often the system's only as good as somebody maybe forgetting to put in a data entry or something. So there is a system there that should mean that if there is MD who has died, then that should get notified to the discharge team. We've also able to access the system, so again that should be on the system and it should be flagged through, but we'll make sure that is checked to make sure it's doing what we should be doing, but definitely the systems in place to do that. And finally, just to pick up Councillor McDonald's point, and again it's a very good point about is this a authority-wide type approach or locality-based? And the answer is both. So we have very much gone to the localities and asked people within the localities. We've asked the staff in the localities. We've gone to the local elected members and asked them what are the issues that are pertinent to you. In turn, then we pull that in and create the South Lanarkshire-wide strategic commissioning plan. What we've done is we've got a high-level draft of what we've received. We've shared that back out with some of the key stakeholders to ask them, is this consistent with what you told us? Are there any areas that you'd want to, emphasise further or anything that we've missed? And we thereafter get the plan back to the IGB. We're going to have a briefing session for IGB members just to go through that in more detail. And once it's signed off, that is then shared with the localities, and each locality planning group is then charged with enacting the plan at a locality level. So and that's where you might well see a kind of difference in approach. So you have still to provide rehabilitation for somebody, but if it's somebody that lives in Biggar as opposed to somebody that lives in Blantyre, then it might be provided in a slightly different way depending on the accommodation and the staffing and what's there, but the outcome should still be the same. So hopefully that's covered most of the points, Chair. And again, if anybody wants to drop me an email or anything, I'd be happy to come back with any further detail.
Thanks, Craig, for that very comprehensive report. And we'll move on to item 10. Why is that item? Item 12. 12. I've just lost the plot. Thanks, Tracy. Self-directed support progress update, and it's Ian will take us through this.
Thanks, Chair. Hopefully this report actually kind of gathers together some of the discussion we've been having over 2 or 3 of the items in this committee. I've got Andrea Tannehill on the call as well, who's the service manager for self-directed support. So if there's any particular kind of questions, Andrea might help me with the response to that. So the report itself just gives an overview of progress to date in SDS. It sets it in the national kind of context, gives some information on the improvement service, comparative analysis. But I think what that shows is that we continue to make progress. More people are picking up direct payments, are taking some more control over their care arrangements through option 2. But if we benchmark ourselves against other areas, there's still a bit of work to be done here. So we want to kind of keep making further progress in those areas. We've already talked about some of the work around trying to bring in additional care management capacity, so that would really help underpin the SDS model, just to make sure that everyone's got their Living Your Life Issues assessment. I suppose almost picking up on one of Councillor Walker's points there, everyone who's got a settled care package should have a Living Your Life Issues assessment underpin it, and should have an SDS budget they use to fund that support plan going forward, and they have got some control and choice and are co-producing the support plan going forward. So that's really the vision of where we want to get to. I suppose we're seeing in the report we've made progress, but there's still more to be taken forward. As we go through to the report, we refer to the new standards that came out last year in the section 3.12. We've noted the additional resources gone into the STS team in section 3.13, and as we move into section 4.4, we start recapping on some of the progress made so far. So we've recently relaunched the assessment tool, the Living Your Life You Choose assessment, with 2 assessments before, a pre-SDS as it was called, and an SDS assessment, which is a little bit clunky. So we brought those together to try and improve the access to assessments and make it more streamlined for the workers undertaking it. But we're doing a bit of work around carers as well, just touch on that theme. But we're also trying to improve some of the financial governance and consistency around SDS, so just to make sure we've got good oversight over the cash payments going out the door, make sure we've got some more steady arrangements around budgets for carers, because I think we had a bit of a quick fix arrangement put in place a few years back, which wasn't really working for anyone. So we've recently looked at that and improved that arrangement and pushed out a new model going forward. So we flagged that in section 6. So but hoping that this gives you a flavour of where we're at, the work that's been done, the work that's planned for the future. And if you have any particular questions, I'm sure between myself and Andrea we can cover those.
Thanks, Ian. Any questions, Lynn?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions actually. Looking at section 6, right down at the bottom, change will result in some individuals receiving a different amount, some less and some more. That concerns me, that people that have had a budget are now going to find themselves with it reduced. And the second thing is 6.2, talking about forensic support and audit activity, basically allowing for more robust governance. Initial target recovery has been set at 350,000 per annum. Just for somebody that's like me, in common parlance, please, are you looking to recover or save £350,000 from the SDS budget? Thank you.
I can cover both of those. So we, as I said in the introduction, we had arrangements in place in terms of establishing carers' budgets, which were proving to not be particularly effective. So we both had carers expressing, dissatisfaction with some of the processes. In fact, the social workers as well were concerned about the arrangements, and some of the outputs of the calculations didn't make sense to them. So Andrea's team have done some work on that, have revamped the model to try and make sure it's fair and equitable for all. But we do recognise there might be some people whose budget would reduce, but equally be people who will get an increased budget coming out for this. One of the things linking to the 6.2 is we find is that people have got unspent sums of money, so we allocate them a notional budget based on their assessment, the budget we think they will need and can spend over the year. But due to a variety of circumstances, what we find is that not everyone spends all of the money all of the time, and that, I think, in itself can cause some concern for the service user or carer in terms of what the position is. So essentially, if they're not spending the money, that should be recovered by the council to be recycled again into providing other care. So we've done various one-off exercises in the past, and we have found that there is money there to be recovered. So we've now put in place a couple of staff who do that on a more steady basis. So in a way, it's a two-pronged approach. What they're trying to avoid is any errors in the process. So we avoid any overpayments in the first instance or underpayments in the first instance, and we're doing a regular review of the direct payments just to make sure there was any money accumulating there that isn't going to be used, that can be recovered by the council and then put to good use in terms of the care system overall. So that's the intentions, and I think we're probably pretty much in line with many other councils in that respect now by putting in place that resource.
Thank you. Just as a further question,
Sure.
the people that have money taken from them that have a reduction, if they raise a complaint about that, can future committee be notified of that, please? In terms of obviously not personal details, but numbers of complaints and regarding over the amount of money that's been reduced. Thank you.
Okay.
I think we need to have a wee look at how we would produce that. I mean, certainly any complaints will be recorded through the complaints process. People are quite entitled to ask for a review of their circumstances, and we respond positively to that. So generally, the the product of that discussion would be having a further look at the assessment, the care arrangements, just to make sure we're getting that correct. So there is a process in place to make sure that if the person's got a concern, we can revisit that and make sure that we're doing the right thing. I don't know whether, Andrew, you wanted to put your hand up, whether you had anything else to add into that?
I was just, excuse me, thanks, Chair. I was just going to say the same. It would be under review process. The other thing we did was there was 3 categories of payment. So the first one was for older people. The next 2 were for adult specialist rates. So what we were finding was we had a disparity in terms of the older people to adults. So that's why we came up with the 109, which is the nursing home rate, so that it's making it more, as Hugh was talking about, it makes it more equal for people. So what we're finding is people are getting more budget and others, as you say, are getting less. But what we will do is if that's not meeting their needs, we will review that and obviously make sure that we still meet their eligible needs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Margaret.
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly, I'm in 3.8, and thanks, Craig, for your response to my questions. But just quickly, 3.8 kind of iterates what I was saying. In order to increase the uptake of SDS, you need to release it from money from existing service provision. And I think we need detailed information around that in terms of the transfer of financial resources and the impact to the services, because it says it in your own paper. You're not going to be able to fund the level of SDS option 1, 2, enhanced, whatever, and also some projective information around prevalence and how many enhanced option 1s, etc. You think the overall amount's going to be. But anyway, again, I would just say, because I think it's important, in order for us as elected members or whoever's elected members after me to make those decisions, I think we need much more detail around the impact of the reduction in services that's obviously going to emanate from this, and the detailed financial figures around it. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Andy?
Thanks, John. Actually, on the discussions we're having about SDS payments, right, I'm dealing with a case at the moment, as it turns out, where there has been a significant reduction in the budget for this particular constituent of mine. Having made inquiries through the local team leader, I was told, his words not mine, that mostly everybody's budgets are being cut this year, right? I'm quite happy that Ian has said that any individual case
I think you've frozen, Andy. Oh, you're
something
there.
Wrong there.
Did
you
hear
wrong. What I said?
Yeah, you were. I think you'd more or less finished, Andy, just before you cut off.
Yeah. Just to reiterate, I'm quite pleased with what Ian said, and I will be making representation to him to have a review done on this particular case. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andy. No further questions? We agree the recommendations? Hello? No? Agreed. Yeah, thank you. I don't have any urgent business or items of budget, but I'd just like to thank everybody for their support and their constructive criticism over the past few years. A sincere and heartfelt thanks to all the officers for all the extreme hard work they've done, particularly over the past 2 years. And I extend that heartfelt thanks to all the frontline staff, because without them, what would we do? Would have been lost without them going the extra mile. I'd also like to thank Tracy Slater for keeping me right all the time. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Bye.
Thanks, Chair.